recording?
Yeah, I did. Alright, just some introduction to start. My name is Clement, he and pronouns. What else? Obviously, views are not my own, this is for the sake of debating. Alright. Two arguments will govern this debate. First, why is it specifically in the interest of the Cuban church, specifically to get more followers? And secondly, why the refusal to recognize leads to a religious schism, and this is bad for the Cuban church, obviously. With this, 3 points of setup. First, what we will do is we will recognize them as Catholics and we will allow them their practices, such as animal sacrifice, and we'll say that this is like specifically good Catholic practices, or at least we'll allow them to do so. And presumably we'll also promote Santeria like into Catholic priests, give them some level of autonomy, have them work against us and cooperate, because this is likely to work well since they're already asking for this per the info side. Secondly, this debate is specifically about the Catholic Church in Cuba. This is the leadership in Cuba. You mean specifically the bishop of Cuba, wherever it is, not just about Catholicism as a whole. Thirdly, the alternative on their side of the house that you don't recognize them as Catholics and you explicitly say so. Presumably, even though right now they're trying to be recognized, they won't continuously do this forever. They have to deal with the risk of this organization, Santeria, getting really, really mad at the Catholic Church and being declaring themselves as completely separate at some point in the future. Obviously, my second argument deals with this. First then, why is this in the interest of the Cuban church, or like why does this get the Cuban church far more followers? But before that, why is followers a priority for the Cuban church? 3 reasons. First is a core tenet of Catholicism, right? The leadership is probably very, very religious, they're very zealous, they actually believe in what they're doing, which means that they want more followers because they want to save more people. Secondly, they want more donations and support, where uniquely in Cuba, because of the communist history, the Catholic Church is particularly oppressed. So you need and more, like you're particularly resource starved, which is why you need more supporters, because supporters leads to more influence at the government, it leads to, for instance, more donations, you're better funded. Thirdly, it gets them more papal favor, right? The papal government in Vatican really likes it when their local bishops are very, very good at recruiting, because for instance, this increases the amount of Catholics in your country, which one can get you like, for instance, a cardinal in the next papal election. It can two, also just get more funding directed towards you, so this is in your interest. Why won't this be taken badly? As in like, why won't you recognizing this faith cause the Vatican to be very, very mad at you because you're like blasphemy or whatnot? 3 reasons again. One, there's a large degree of precedent for this happening all across Latin America, uniquely in the Dominican Republic. The local faith, I think it's called like Igbo or something like that, like cooperate with the Catholic Church. I know this because there was an infographic outside in the hallway like talking about this, so this precedent is happening. Secondly, the Vatican right now is uniquely unpopular because the church is quite progressive, right? They're supporting gay rights, supporting abortion, so uniquely the papal church doesn't have a lot of power, which is why they uniquely need your support, because it allows them to continue to have like relative support among the bishops and not get replaced by the next papal election by all the really, really conservative Catholics. Uniquely, them oppressing you doesn't get them more favor with the people who currently hate them right now, because just because you put down like this like the Cuban church doing this thing, it doesn't make all the people who hate abortion, all the people who hate gay marriage like Pope Francis anymore. Thirdly, your followers specifically have Santerian roots. They come from Cubans. They likely have a lot of this folk culture where they have family members or friends or their community members are participating in this. So even though the average Catholic person who's in like Rome or like Italy or somewhere around the world might think this is a bit weird, the person, your actual most devout followers, the people who actually are your direct constituents, will likely not like see this as that weird of a thing because you're already like favorable to it. Why then does this lead to more followers, or why then does this help you? Firstly then, we think immediately this allows you to take in a huge amount of followers in terms of you get this entire movement to join you, and the leadership and the endorsement of this leadership will allow these individuals to go to church, will allow these individuals to see themselves as Catholic and attend your specific holdings and your specific masses. But secondly, you're also viewed more favorably among the average Cuban as well, because they want you to adopt these things because they see you as recognizing their like traditional roots, their ethnic roots, recognizing their cultural traditions. You're seen as less neo-colonial, and this way you're more popular among the average populace in Cuba, including both the Catholics who are currently part of your church, but also the average person who has the potential to join into your organization and convert to Catholicism. But lastly, this leads to more long-term recruitment for a few reasons. Where A, you're no longer seen as colonial, so you break out of this negative past that's constantly haunted you in Cuba and throughout Latin America. Secondly, you create a lower barrier of entry where new converts don't have to like give up all their past traditions, their holidays, some things that are very based in cultural roots and stuff like that, which is very difficult for people to give up. And lastly, you also Trojan the horse them into becoming more and more devout Catholics by the traditional Catholic definition. Because once these people go into your church and are recognized as Catholics, they'll attend your masses, right? They'll listen to your speeches. You have the ability to influence these individuals insofar as you only have the ability to influence in that they're actually in your organization, not when they're not in your organization, they don't listen to you and don't see you as a voice of authority. Obviously, the nuance here is that you also have a lot of power and a lot of leverage in the situation, right? For instance, the priests that you choose to promote that are from the Santeria Santerian background, you can promote the ones that are more friendly to Catholicism rather than the ones that are slightly less friendly to Catholicism. So you have a lot of influence and power to pit these people against each other to ensure that in the long run, even though currently it's not going to be very, very traditionally Catholic, they'll become more and more traditionally Catholic in the future. This point matters because the most fundamental existential crisis facing the Catholic Church right now is uniquely that they're facing less and less people joining in. Is that more and more people in Europe and also all across the world are becoming less and less faithful because secularism is on the rise. It is the fact that uniquely in Cuba, the government is not particularly friendly to the Catholic Church because they have communist backgrounds. You're facing a constant conflict with all the other religions that also may come in and poach your followers. This is an issue that is your top priority. Second argument though, why is the refusal to recognize this, why is the refusal to recognize this leads to religious schism? The friendly here is because of the communist past, and a lot of people aren't particularly religious, and they're told that religion is bad throughout like their upbringing or whatnot. They have an unfavorable view of religion in the first place, and uniquely, because of colonialism, they also have an unfavorable view of Catholicism, specifically among that religions. So the note here is that Santerians won't be accommodating forever, right? Their leadership uniquely also has their own interests. They're also devout with their own beliefs. They want their own followers. They want some level of influence. They probably believe that animal sacrifice is actually holy. So they don't like the competition of the Catholic Church existing in the first place for their own followers. So they have an incentive and active interest at some point, if you're unable to accommodate to their demands now, to completely denounce the Catholic Church completely and form their own church, like Henry V style, right? Like Anglican spirit or whatnot. They'll still keep Mass and baptism, but they just don't recognize papal authority in Rome. So even if you don't buy that this is likely to happen, you have to buy that this is like a substantial risk of happening, right? So you can still impact out the arguments for why this is bad. Why is then this very, very bad? 3 reasons. One, this actively competes with your followers, right? Because now you have an organized religion that is created that has the ability to preach to your followers, and they have an advantage in that they're more culturally consonant to your followers who are friendlier to them. But secondly, you're going to face a lot of Vatican backlash, right? Because previously, you're just a nobody in Cuba, right? But now when there's a religious schism that suddenly denounces the Catholic Church, it hits the world news. Now pro-fascists get interested in this situation, and they see this situation, and they go, oh, maybe I should revoke your papal authority because you don't know how to reckon your bishop position, because you don't know how to regulate your situation here. You're causing massive scandals for the Catholic Church. But thirdly and importantly, and bad for Catholicism in general, is that this system can also spread to other places, other Caribbean islands. It threatens all the other Catholic places all around the Caribbean and Latin America, and that's particularly harmful for the Church, and it's also harmful to you since you're also devout Catholic. It's harmful as far as you get less funding from the papal see, or you actively get removed immediately by the Pope. For these reasons, proposed.
On the framing, I don't think they engage with the relevant counterfactual. That is to say, if the things and systematic structures of the world they say are true, then the Catholic Church can just literally appease these people in any other way. I'm unsure what the delta of formal recognition is. That is to say, we can give them charity, we can preach to them, we can invite them to sermons, we can still promote local priests, we can still say that these people kind of welcome in the Catholic Church, they can still come to your community services, we can still have joint churches and everything like that, and all these structures exist, and we can accomplish all the benefits they have. They might be like, oh, these people will be incredibly angry, but why? I'm unsure what official recognition actually does for these people, given the fact that these people are often incredibly poor, they have been disenfranchised, they come from slave roots, which indicates you don't have much money, so they're likely to prefer the charity over this. In fact, there's likely to be a complacency problem on their side of the house. That is to say, if the Catholic Church recognizes them, they'll feel like there's no more political opposition against them, so they won't feel as needed to help them or help the poor or the needy, which certainly, one, is violating Catholic principles, and two, makes them more angry over the long term. But then, they say that the principle of the Catholic Church is to advocate for more followers. No, you cannot advocate for followers in unprincipled ways. This is why it's wrong to kill people in order to get them to convert to Christianity, and why this crusade is definitely seen as a bad thing right now, even if some people did it before, or why it's bad to violate the tenets of the God in order to accomplish Christianity and things like that. 2 principal violations on their side of the house. 1, it is not to place in the Catholic Church of Cuba hierarchically to determine that these people are Catholics. Notably, the Catholic Church of Cuba, A, does not speak for all Catholics. When you say that these people are accepted into the Catholic Church, you're making a cognitive statement about the religion as a whole. 2, they don't have the authority to do so. That is to say, they're not the ones with the highest connection to God. The priests in the Cuban Catholic Church do not have the same connection to God as the Vatican or the Pope does. And notably, they make the argument that the Vatican and the Pope want these people to be Catholic, in which case the Church in Rome, if they wanted these people to be Catholic, could just declare them as Catholic in the first place. It is not the obligation of the Catholic Church of Cuba, and is no longer their right, because these people should not be able to determine these things, which is why the Roman Catholic Church is the one to interact with all the other Latin American groups in the first place. The second is the principle of spirituality. That is to say, man cannot determine what is Catholic and not Catholic. Notably, the 3 descriptive factors that we get about Santeria are things that are literally equivalent to literally every single monotheistic religion, about Mass and people agglomerating in central churches and praising God, even if there are different words about it, and a single supreme creator and everything like that. In which case, it's not up to us to determine what is Catholic and not Catholic. That's up to God in and of itself. And if these people certainly are Catholic, and they say they are Catholic, then God will forgive them in the afterlife or anything like that. that, we should always default to being conservative rather than liberal in terms of what the Catholic Church defines as Catholic in the first place. Because there's always a risk you're straying away from God. But if you are too religious, there's certainly not a risk there. In which case, it is certainly not our place, it is the place of the Lord, and there's no signals at all. Then they say we need to do this in order to appease the Catholic Church. One, recognize the Catholic Church can do this anyway. Two, recognize the Catholic Church, they themselves say, is basically unpopular because they're becoming increasingly conservative. It is important to note that the root of conservatism causing unpopularity isn't just because people are anti-gay. It's because they feel like their society and traditions are changing. They feel like their religion is no longer what they were when they was a child. And they feel like the new tenets are breaking religious principles. And people are literally just trying to appease the liberal people. In which case, the fact that this in and of itself is making the Catholic Church unpopular indicates that they're likely rolling back, which Pope Francis is doing right now. And notably, the conservative faction inside your church certainly doesn't, since these people will vote against it. Second, they need to prove that it's the best possible way to appease the Catholic Church. That's to say, the Cuban Catholic Church can literally spend resources to do anything at all, especially if the Cuban government is absolutely considering assault on them and want these people to be less religious, as per the PMC framing, which indicates there's certainly a better trade-off of resources of keeping Cubans rather than hemorrhaging them and followers and spending resources there. Then they say the average Cuban will like this because they want people to have like diversity and things like that. I would consider this is unlikely to be the case for two reasons. One is that the average Cuban actually is likely to look down on the Yoruba or like the Santeria religion. This is for basically because Cuba has been under the sanctions regime, so they've been incredibly economically poor. So people like to define outgroups, and the government likes to blame these people and disenfranchise people as the root cause of all the problem in order to get easy political wins and prevent revolution, especially since these people are incredibly easily disenfranchised. Two, I would say there's a massive push for conservatism inside Cuba right now. Even the Roman Catholic Church is not conservative. Cuba certainly is conservative. That is to say, the government wants to follow a nationalized Cuban identity, and the government is often run by incredibly old people who are conservative right now. So promoting the liberal religion will certainly make the Cubans actually angry. But third, recognize that not every single priest inside a Cuban Catholic Church agrees with this. Certainly there are religious segments that are going to be like, this is absolutely crazy, or the animal sacrifice is necessarily bad. And these priests will exist. And even if they're 10%, the minute the decision is made, they get a lightning rod. They get to preach to their followers. They'll say this is breaking the tenets of the Catholic Church and separate and fracture on their own thing. And people have to actually engage with these religious debates, which certainly create way more infighting and fracturing, where you could have otherwise spent resources on accumulating more followers and preventing yourself from being nuked by the Cuban government. Finally, they talk about the schism because the Santeria are going to form their own church. No, they certainly will not. The Cuban government, and they say, is already against Catholicism. If these people try to form their own church, the Cuban government will just absolutely destroy them. And so, you don't want another religious center, especially if the disenfranchised can unite and have power, because that is the best way to advocate against the Cuban government if they are being oppressed right now and they are economically disenfranchised. On to the off case. First argument is that the Santeria are just not going to like you. It's important to understand that the Santeria are not a monolithic religion. That is to say, there are likely to be many different interpretations of Santeria and many different ways people practice. This is one necessarily true. These people are disenfranchised people and spread throughout all of Cuba necessarily, so they do not have absolutely politically strong communication structures. Two, and this religion started as a folk religion. It was built underground by slaves. In which case, there's likely to be huge amounts of differences between them as people have differentiated interpretations, and the traditions are passed down orally. Three, it's the fact there are likely to be different leaders. That is to say, it's a nascent religion, and it's not united under like warfare or anything like that. There's no centralized Santeria church, so different leaders will have different interpretations of religion and tell people to practice different things. Notably, the commonalities here are just three and incredibly broad. That is to say, some people are likely to promote animal sacrifice and some people are not. And there are likely people who are also already part of the Catholic Church and likely to identify more as Catholic. In which case, there are two scenarios. Either one, they organize all the Santeria as whole as Catholic, which certainly leads to massive amounts of backlash because now you're accepting fringe groups which Cubans are desperately disagreeing with, and other Santeria religions and other Santeria leaders which are likely to already have infighting insofar as leaders who are against each other and want to promote more followers for themselves. In which case, you have massive amounts of fracturing against the Santeria. All don't say these people are not of the same religion, and you have massive backlash against you from the Cuban government and the Cuban people, which are likely to disagree with specific fringe tenets of the religion when you're now saying everything is okay. But second of all, and more importantly, said, or you choose a specific sect. But these people are unlikely to be very happy because one, every single other Santeria that wants recognition will be backlashing against you. They'll say you're not diversifying and that you're a tenant of the Cuban government in order to choose these people and you're not advocating for the rest of them. Second of all, is that these people that say anyone who's joining the Catholic Church is a false sect, that these people are selling out, etc., which leads to massive amounts of backlash and less Santeria actually being part of your church in the first place compared to us being actively being able to go to poor communities and convert them slowly over time. Third of all, and more importantly is that these people are likely to just have massive amounts of infighting. That is to say, if you choose one group and that group happens to be too radical, every single other group that is more moderate than that group will just be like, this is bad. And if you're selecting certain priests and picking and choosing who should represent the Santeria religion, there's also leads to massive backlash.
No information.
No. Second of all, is that the Santeria are unlikely to actually want to be part of the Catholic Church. Even if they're advocating for this right now, this is likely to appease followers that exist right now. But leaders, one, don't want to be replaced by Catholic leaders, because obviously the Santeria priests are not going to be as high up in the Cuban Catholic Church as the Cuban Catholic Church in and of itself. And the current leaders, especially those people want to monopolize power. Two, is that the Catholic Church is likely to try to make this seem more moderate and make it seem better in order to appease the Cuban people and appease the Roman Catholic Church and everyone that looks in it. And based on the fact that these religious leaders likely disagree with some parts of Santeria, even if they accept them at all. So in which case, when their religious tenets are being written, or these leaders are being against that, they will just rebel against the Catholic Church and schism. But the problem is that once you do a degree of integration and these people vote against you, you're wasting massive amounts of resources. Two, it looks incredibly bad for the Catholic Church perceptually. If they are ready, the Roman Catholic Church really cares about perception right now. This is absolutely terrible for the Cuban Catholic Church. And three is that it's a waste of resources if you don't get more followers as per other impacts. Finally, why does the Cuban government absolutely excoriate you? It is important that the Cuban government is likely very against Santeria. This is because of one, the disenfranchised warning that I give above. Two is within the Cuban government promoting an idea of Cuban communism, which often highlights class differences over racial differences and wants to eradicate the idea of diversity and different folk culture inside Cuba because they want people to be united in the class struggle as itself. And the communist government is often incredibly conservative. That is to say, these people are A, already run by old people, but two, they want to maintain control of the faith. So when the Cuban Catholic Church does this against their will, they'll be incredibly angry. And third of all is that the Cuban Catholic government also wants conservatism as an idea of political motivation. That is to say, we're going against the degeneracy of the liberal West, especially as the United States has reinstated tensions and Donald Trump is back in office. And which case they likely use this all to differentiate themselves. Also, more importantly, is that helping disenfranchised groups is certainly bad. That is to say, they want these people to be absolutely poor and weak and not get any charity or be integrated into the church. They have less of a say in order to rebel against the Cuban government because these people certainly have a lot to speak out against. Third, I just think that the colorism does exist in Cuba. These people were former slaves. They're likely to be disenfranchised. They're likely to be endemic feelings that these people are less than inside Cuba. So the Cuban government, which is endemically racist, will just go against the Catholic Church. This means that one, you will have less followers because they'll ban the Catholic Church, say the Catholic Church is bad. So those people will join because they're afraid of the Cuban government backlash. Two, it means you get significantly less donations because rich people who are entitled to the Cuban government, especially since there's a high threshold of donation in a Cuba country where it's relatively poor and there's massive amounts of sanctions, will just not donate to you. Third is the Cuban government will actively crack down on the church. Or four is the Cuban government will use this as an opportunity to appropriate the church. Say every single church leader that promoted this decision is a liar. They should replace the Cuban government proxies instead. And this is the true interpretation of religion, which the conservatives of Cuba, the older and wealthy people, would certainly agree with. You just get nuked.
Is everyone ready? Cool. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clarify the interests of the Catholic Church. I think this argument obviously comes before literally everything else in the round because obviously just nebulously saying, we care about members, we care about the belief of those people is what we have to break in the deadlock. It's a couple reasons why the Catholic Church probably cares less about members and cares more about the individual viscosity and degree to which people believe inside of Christianity. First, they obviously need to make sure that these people actually go to heaven. Clearly it was the case that the Catholic Church should be like, Nick, if you, for instance, get a girlfriend, you're immediately going to go to heaven. I think a lot of people would join Christianity. It's deeply unclear why the Catholic Church is always perennially cared about those things. Second, it's just a numbers question. You're only marginally increasing the amount of people who believe in Catholicism at best on their side of the house, but there's really billions of people, and if their arguments are true that this is likely to proliferate in terms of the practices that people have, potentially millions of additional people you'd be condemning to hell on their side of the house. Thirdly, it is just factually untrue that, for instance, the bishop is able to reinterpret the Bible. This comes from A, papal infallibility, B, the fact that the Catholic Church is a largely hierarchical organization with the Pope at the top and his ability with the cardinals to interpret individual Catholicism, but also, at best, their argument about Trojan horses is just a reason why right now you should encourage people to convert at a larger degree. I'll get more on that later. So even if all their arguments are true, I think it's the case that the Catholic Church cares more about the ability to convince people rather than total number of membership. But a couple things here. First, I think Santeria is largely dying. I don't think there actually is an argument coming outside government to explain why Santeria is becoming the dominant religion outside of just asserting it. A couple reasons why. First, these are folk religions which lack institutional organization and resources in order to perpetuate. Two, as AR points out, they are largely sent by word of mouth, which means that every single generation, more and more people are likely to be falling out of the religion. Thirdly, there's obviously a high level of commitment if you're doing things like animal sacrifice or positioning the candle in the right way to kill the billy goat. Probably means that individual people have to have a really strong degree of religious fervor in order to stay inside of the religion. It means other religions that are able to say, you could just go to mass every couple of weeks are probably a lot more able to persuade people to buy into it. I think it is also the case that a religion like Catholicism, which has far more institutional capacity power, means that every single person who are losing to Santeria is also then likely as a result to join Catholicism. Additionally, this is largely prominent in communities that are probably over time being assimilated or entirely evaporating, given that A, Cuba has faced a massive amount of migration, given the fact that the government in charge right now are part of the white Cubans and the Afro-Cubans are the minority populations. Two, these groups are often probably benefiting from things like economic integration, the large changes demographically inside of Cuban society, which probably means that most of these people are either dying off or they are converting. And thirdly, if the argument is true that these people want to be recognized by Catholicism, I think most of those people just end up converting on our side of the house. Why? Because if it was the case that all these people had gone through these religious practices and been like, I'm 100% certain that killing a rabbit is going to send me to heaven, they would not be asking to be recognized by Catholicism. I think a huge amount of people just on our side of the house where the Catholic Church says no are likely to convert. Why? First, the people have degrees of belief that they are actually not going to be saved, and they have a fear that by following their religion, they are likely to go to hell. It just means on our side of the house, we have a waiting game for all these people when they continue to hemorrhage them. It is very unlikely that, for instance, current people who are in the Catholic Church of Cuba right now are ever going to leave. This is the argument we get from side government. So the question is, do we have to just wait out this religious group? I think it is very likely the case given that A, they lack the institutional power to do so, and B, they are probably losing on the argument of convincing people, especially as these societies liberalize and more information becomes more accessible for all their arguments about why secularism is rising. The simple question is, if I go from doing animal sacrifice today, am I going to just become a-religious? No, I'm probably going to convert to the other most proximate religion. Next thing on the Trojan horse. I just think you see a massive decline in the amount of support for Christian endeavors inside of Cuba right now. First, a bit of framing here. I think it's important to note that especially in Caribbean countries, there's a huge amount of resource constraints on the Catholic churches right now. They largely rely on support from the Pope and other Catholic donations writ large. Two, especially when you're talking about Caribbean countries, they are literally the #1 destination for Catholic missions. It's people, for instance, spending weeks or months building houses or helping communities or reaching out. These are the #1 way that many of these countries are able to get charity, especially during an American embargo where there's huge restrictions both resourcely and politically on the ability to help these countries. On their side of the house, I just think it's the case that people just stop going to countries like Cuba. A couple of reasons why. First, they have deep religious beliefs that integrating these religions are actively bad. We literally get the argument coming out of PMC that this will allow more countries to do it. But I think the average person, for instance, in the United States, per their argument, who hears in the media that now Catholic churches inside of Cuba are allowing people to do animal sacrifice is likely to be very bad. Second, I think people are unlikely to believe and play a game of chance when it comes to their own religious faith. The fear of this perpetuating is likely to be propagated by people on side of the Christian right in the United States or prominent members of the Catholic Church. Because if it is the case you're going to do things like resource sharing, there is always an internal incentive within the Catholic Church, a priest or a bishop who fears he is losing his own political sphere of influence because if in the absolute best case is an incredibly successful strategy for membership, fears, now other religious people are becoming more powerful than me because they were able to recruit all these people. I feel insecure about my position, which means there's internal schisms within the Catholic Church from people who feel like in the best case for side government are not able to recruit as many people and as a result come out against this. Additionally, I think people have they have intuitive aversions against this, given the fact that religion, for all their arguments, is also highly personal. People are very unlikely to believe that these kind of agglomerations and changes are in line with Christian doctrine. They literally just assert that people are going to be okay with this. I think it is very, very unlikely. Additionally, even if it's the case that people have some moderation on this question, there are more moderate interpretations of this religion, I think those people are just likely to convert on our side of the house because A, if they have feelings of insecurity that their current religion is not sufficient, the likely alternative would just become a Cuban Catholic, and B, the Catholic Church has far more ability to alert people, but also you lose more people on their side of the house to secularization. Because, for instance, if you get less donations to Catholic churches, there's less Catholic mission projects. This means that the value that the Catholic Church provides from both a resource and community perspective goes away. You are the most likely to lose these people because they are the people who are the closest to being secular, because just being a kind of regular run-of-the-mill Catholic, Cuban Catholic, is the probably person who is most likely to become secular, i.e. the most person to give up their religion. By contrast, on their side of the house, these people are actually quite religious, but I think most of them are just willing to convert because they have deep feelings of insecurity. This, I think, outweighs the entirety of their case, because it just means on their side of the house you have a massive decline in the amount of members on your side of the house. I also think the Catholic Church is broadly against this. They say, the Catholic Church is liberalizing. It's important to know the way they're liberalizing. First, they are liberalizing specifically in areas that are meant to maximize the amount of penetration they get. But also, very specifically, they are maximizing on things that are not very prominent within the Catholic canon. It's important to note that A, this would be actively antagonistic to things like the commandments, like you're just like maliciously engaging in paganist behavior. Two, I think for all the arguments about racism that A argues, there's probably intuitive reasons why, for instance, the white European part of the Catholic Church is likely to believe that Caribbean countries, specifically the Afro-Caribbean populations on their side of the house, are probably not good in terms of their interpretation of Catholicism. B, there's an active competition. Now, one priest feels like he might lose his job as a result of it, or he might be totally replaced by someone who on their side of the house is just being put into their own Catholic organization. This just means that A, there is a massive negative incentive to cooperate with these people. Also, even if it's the case that you change this doctrine over time, if people no longer feel like they're going to get saved, there is a massive backlash necessarily against the church on their side of the house. I think, again, you are just likely to see a huge wave of secularization as a result of this. Cool. Next thing I want to handle is kind of the line by line that we get coming out of opposition. First, on the question of what you're doing in terms of supporting. I think we just get no response to the principled arguments. It's important to note that A, the massive expansion of Catholicism is not the #1 priority of the Catholic Church. Even so far as A, there are other religions that exist. You could just assert that Islam or Judaism are already inside of Catholicism right now. This would numerically increase the amount of members you have. This is obviously not the point of these religions. Second, they are highly hierarchical structures that require people to be bought in and also believe inside of the faith. So even if it is the case you're able to increase the amount of members, if we're not actually saving those members, I don't think you care about it. Next, on the question of the government. First, I think uniquely it is the case that the Catholic Church of Cuba is probably largely uninterested / does not care about the question of anti-colonialism. First, a huge amount of these people are probably white Cubans. Insofar as A, the Catholic Church was able to be imported through colonialism, the people who have the remnant structures inside the Catholic Church of Cuba are probably themselves incredibly white and privileged. Two, as AR points out to you, no response. The government of Cuba uniquely has reasons not to inflame things like the relations between the Afro-Cubans and the white Cubans inside of the country, highlighting potential differences, or this indigenous culture is uniquely bad for a government that is trying to actively erase those things and not support that kind of numericization. They just say, it has happened in other places, but supposedly this is not like an infinite argument to just say, because at some point they've allowed other religions to come in, you should just do it all the time. Again, this would be a reason to just be like, like Muslims are close enough, guys, like they're Abrahamic religions. Obviously, there needs to be an explanation as to why this is the case. Also, I think most people probably don't like this, especially within the broader canon of the Catholic Church, and you probably should care about them more, because literally the Cuban Church cannot exist without the donations, material, and practical support that they get from the broader church writ large. Next on the question of the Pope. First, I think the Pope isn't deciding this. This is obviously a case about what the Cuban Church is likely to do. So the Pope is not on their side of the house. Second, I think the Pope is likely to oppose this because it's deeply unclear if he showed any form of interest in doing so. Also, I think it is the case that even if it is true that there would be some benefit to incorporating those people, saying no encourages them to come back with a better deal. For instance, it encourages them to give more concessions right off the bat. So instead of saying, you're Catholic now and we're going to change you in the church, they concede before you let them in on our side of the house, which just means we have way more asymmetric advantage. Because I point out, you can just win the waiting game. These populations are waiting, their religions are far more fervent, and also they are likely to just become Catholic on our side of the house who continue to hemorrhage members. Versus the Catholic Church is not losing people to folk religions, given those folk religions are far less institutionally powerful. This turns their Trojan horse argument, because they're able to do it on the reverse on our side of the house, just a much greater effect with without triggering all of this backlash. Next on the question of schism, I just don't think the schism is happening in the status quo. Also, I don't think it's the case that there's a huge empirical history of these changes happening. We literally just get an assertion that comes on their side of the house. Next on the question of sectarianism, even if we give them their absolute best case on this, I think the sectarianism is far worse on their side of the house, because it is important to note that these individual sects are likely to believe that, your religions are giving up the core fundamental identity. This not only means that you have a huge schism on their side of the house, but also means we're probably unlikely to claim all these members. At the end of the day, I think it's very simple. First, they just drop all the principal arguments. We say you should operate from the perspective of the epistemic community that just counter-assert arguments AR had warranting on them. I also think you have way less donations in community and charity work within Cuba, which is probably the number one question when it comes to members. Thus, proud to oppose.
2 instant ballots for op. 1, you can do the Trojan horse on our side. Notably, I give you the counterfacts with the topic LOC and the MO expands on it, which is very simple. You can still convert these people. You can still go inside these communities and give them charity. You can still have George sermons. You can still select and promote local priests that align with your beliefs and still have your priests go into these areas and convert the people which the Cuban government is likely to support, given the fact that you are now homogenizing the group. Notably, we give you the argument as to why it's likely to succeed over the long term. That 1, these religions often require a huge amount of fervor, and as a result, people want to shift towards easier religions to accomplish. 2, is that Cuba is liberalizing right now, and as a result, as people gain more economic wealth, they are more likely to see the Catholic Church as they go from really, really conservative to moderately conservative. 3rd, is that a lot of these populations are just going away and immigrating away, given the fact that they're already disenfranchised. 4, is that these people see that they are absolutely poor, so they want to resources of the Catholic Church, so they're likely to just convert anyway. And the fact that they are asking for it indicates that they want to be Catholic in the first place. Second argument that is an instant win is that the Roman Catholic Church does it anyway. Even if you buy their argument that the Vatican actually wants people to be part of the church, notably, the Pope can just be like, these people are a part of the church now, like they did with every single other Latin American religion right now. And insofar as they do it, the Cuban Catholic Church is de jure part of them, in which case we get all their benefits, but under the harms and potential rebukes to the Catholic Church. And it's important to note that the risk that the Catholic Church is not on your side is incredibly large. That is to say, because the government limits you in the amount of donations you get, because they want to promote the communist Catholic as per the PMC, you are clearly reliant on the resources from the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church actively supporting you in order to maintain political legitimacy. If they rebuke you at all or side with the conservatives, your church and organization is just fucked. And the Cuban government has every single Catholic ballot to come in and replace every single member. Future ballots. 1 is the principle. It is important to understand that Catholicism is an incredibly hierarchical religion. That's to say not any individual bishop or any individual priest in some random town can just reinterpret what is Catholic and not Catholic. You cannot be like animal sacrifice is okay insofar as you're the Cuban Catholic Church. That is to say you don't have the deep connection with God, and as a result, when you make these decisions, you're not in an epistemic certainty place. Comparatively, the Roman Catholic Church is far better suited to make these decisions. The question here is on epistemics. That is to say, these people have a deeper connection with God, so they're more likely to know the truth. And we give you the warranty that you're likely to want to be as cautious as possible. There's always a risk that you are too liberal and accept people to the church and commit sins and don't allow for these people to be saved because you say that they are okay, versus the risk of being too conservative, saying this is what Catholicism is, which is more likely to leave people getting saved and also better promote the idea of the religion. Second argument is that the Cuban government absolutely destroys you. We have a ton of warrants which are not responded to. 1 is that the Cuban government is inherently colorist. These people have been disenfranchised for decades, and the Cuban government is majority made up of white Cubans like the Castro. Second is that the Cuban government likely blames these people as the outgroup for any economic goals, because it's incredibly easy to satiate the Cuban population given the fact that American sanctions exist, and the Cuban government is often seen as the root cause of a lot of issues. Third is that these people likely protest against the Cuban government because they are disenfranchised. The leaders likely rally people up and keep the fervor high by saying the Cuban government is actually bad and the Congress is going to save them and their religion is the right way. Fourth is the Cuban government also wants to homogenize the entire region. That's to say, they don't want to highlight individual folk cultures, because they want to unite everyone under the same class in the global revolution as things happen. And fifthly, they want to decrease any chance of revolution, so they want to say that all Cubans are on the same side. Actively accepting this allows for changes in religion causes the Cuban government to backlash against you when you're already on the same side, insofar as they are against the power of Catholicism and religion as a whole. In which case, they just say, 1, the Catholic Church is illegitimate. This is against communism in and of itself. And people are just afraid to associate with the Catholic Church insofar as they feel like they will be part of the Cuban government's bad hit list. And second of all, and more importantly, is that this bulwark and this propaganda has already been ingratiated into the minds of Cuban people right now. That's the Cubans that are often moderate Catholics just likely agree with the Cuban government, or the ones that decided to stay, in which case these people are likely to leave, and the people that agree with the Cuban government are likely to be most conservative and wealthy because there's more political advantage inside society right now. In which case you lose a ton of donations endogenously, in which case you cannot recruit more members, and any risk of backlash is far worse on you. Third argument is that you actually reveal the Trojan horse. It is actually incredibly important to note that you cannot accomplish every single person inside Santeria. That's to say, Santeria is an incredibly heterogeneous religion. That's because insofar as it's not centralized, there are a lot of leaders who want to rally political support and compete with each other, especially insofar as the religion is passed orally and there's not many communication structures. In which case there's many different religions within Santeria, or many different sects within Santeria that are actively competing with each other. In which case you can either say, I side with all of them, in which case all the leaders will feel like they're being supplanted, that the Catholic Church is taking over positions. And when you say certain things are okay that different sects disagree with, they likely backlash against it. Or you say you agree with one of them, in which case delegitimizes every single other leader. So when you do this and you say this is actually Catholicism now, when you rewrite prescriptions, when you say that these people are Catholics and then actively pass policies or actively try to recruit them into the mainstay Catholicism, all the leaders see exactly what you are doing and they all backlash. They say this is not Santeria, and then they actively go back and say that the Catholic Church is against the principles of Santeria as a whole. In which case you lose out on the members of the disenfranchised communities, you lose out on the conservatives, you lose out on international support, and you lose out on the institutional powers that actually give you money in the first place. And it's a clear off ballot.
Let's start off by killing this weighted out argument that comes later, right? Where they say that the Santeria is going to lose in the long run. This is not going to happen per our second argument because they're going to organize a schism. Because they themselves identify the Santerian leadership as an actor in this debate. This leadership sees the fact, all the reasons they give, why they might lose in the long run. Which is why, inherently, they have an urgency that if they aren't accepted by a Catholic Church and they get leaderships within the Catholic Church and massive amounts of resources, they're going to schism and they're going to organize against you. Why is this something that's incredibly bad? First, they can mobilize massive amounts of anti-colonial movement, and also the vast majority of the population of Cuba, which is descended from Africa rather than the Spanish settlers. Secondly, the Cuban government is likely to support this hierarchical sect rather than the Catholic Church, not only because communist parties tend to be very anti-colonial, but uniquely on a pragmatic standpoint, the Catholic Church is the biggest political rival to the Cuban government because the Catholic Church is the strongest institution inside of Cuba behind the government, which is they much rather have a different religion weakening the Catholic Church rather than something else. So the Cuban government is going to back this hierarchical sect rather than you. You're going to lose massive amounts of followers. But importantly, as the Catholic...
The idea that the Cuban government is going to back Santeria over you, I just need to know.
But I saw a lot in the MG.
And also the mechanism side of inside of PMC was that the Cuban government uniquely sees you as a threat, like the Catholic government is a threat.
That is not the same argument as what I just heard.
Can you tell me specifically where this is in MG?
In MG, yeah, I say that the populace is believing in Santeria, and the government represents the populace, and they're going to listen to the majority of people who are following Santeria.
Yeah, and also in PMC, I do say that the Catholic Church is the primary political rival to the Cuban government.
Where?
That's a good question, though. It's fine. We don't need you.
Honestly, you probably have better flow than me, but it was in the 3 points of framing that I said under my first argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I don't have a name. Yeah, just under consideration. We'll figure it out.
But it's in the framing.
Alright, hold on. What do you have me on time?
1
That's
minute.
4:28.
Alright, and the last thing I said was the primary.
The Catholic Church is
Yeah. What they also don't agree with is our mechanisms from first, which they never responded, is that your most direct interest as the Cuban Catholic Church is to keep your position, right? But the problem is they never respond to the idea that the papacy can literally remove you from power, which is the biggest crisis that actually happens, and they don't respond to the fact that that is a likely outcome. What is our most important path to victory? Our path to victory is simple, which is just proving that Santerian Catholics getting into your church is a very good thing. Let's deal with their responses for what they say for why you actually won't get a lot more followers. First, they say the papacy won't let you reinterpret. They do, because bishops are the church in these instances. The Catholic Church delegates, we told you from first, and we told you the Catholic Church also does this all around the world. For another example, in China, for instance, the Catholic Church and priests celebrate Lunar New Year. This is a thing that every single Catholic Church does. It's ridiculous to say that it's not doctrine. But secondly, we told you that the Pope is uniquely weak in framing, right? So once you do this, the Pope cannot go and denounce you, because then you'll pay massive opposition backlash from the Cuban leadership and the Cuban Church. Which is why, if you do this, the Pope has to go along with you, and per their own mechanism of capable infallibility, you get massive support among Catholics. Secondly, they say the Spanish descent, white Catholics, will move away from you. But no, because you as the bishop are the only authority to Catholicism inside of the Catholic Church, and they just tell you that the Catholic Church is an incredibly hierarchical institution, right? So you have huge leverage over these individuals because you are their only religious authority, and they go to damnation if you don't need to.
I think arguments about colorism in Cuba or in LOC, arguments that either implicate, turn, or interact with that in PMR would be no.
So, okay, can you tell me
specifically? Specifically, because the Catholic Church is hierarchical, this means that white Cubans will just have to listen to the bishop, is a direct response to just the LOC argument, which is that white Cubans have a unique reason not to listen to this.
Okay. Do you think this was earlier?
I'm pretty sure that this is just derivative of the analysis that the Catholicism is a hierarchical church and that they will listen to you. And I think we did frame that you have power as the leadership inside of the Catholic Church. I think it's quite simply derivative. You can think this is a new response. Up to you guys.
It's a crosswalk.
I'm leaning not we'll take it.
Okay, good.
We'll
That's fine.
take it into consideration.
Lastly, they say Santerians are divided. We agree, right? We can choose the best faction, you can get most of them, and if infighting occurs, it's probably a good thing, right? Because you much rather the Santerians fight against themselves and not try to poach your followers, rather than their comparative, which is the Santerians, have a higher likelihood of uniting against you because they overcome their little differences with each other and then realize the Catholic Church run in Rome is probably the bigger threat. What then is the delta in this debate? We say the delta, and the simplest way in which we win this round, is that you simply just immediately have far more followers into their church. Why is this very, very important to you individually as the Cuban leadership? One thing they don't respond to is this idea of papal influence, right? Where the amount of Catholics inside their country directly relates to how much the Vatican cares about you and gives you influence. For instance, whether or not you get a cardinal in the next papal election, whether or not you get funding in terms of missions, right? And here I want to respond to their idea that like missionaries won't come to your area because they see you as heretical, right? But this is the exact opposite of what missionaries do, right? The whole point of missionaries is that they go to places where they don't feel like you are fully Catholic or not, right? So even if you yourself, they see the Cuban Catholic Church as not particularly religious, still a lot of missions, a lot of people will come over to places because they want to convert the people that they see as heretical. So this actually turns their argument, and it's actually better for our side because insofar as Catholics see you as a place to be saved, they're more willing to invest resources. I think at best this is going to be symmetric on both sides. But secondly, more followers means that you can get more dedicated followers in the long run, where you don't want to only be subservient to the white Catholics that they say on their side of the house, because it's a very small population of the overall Cuban population, and this isn't going to get you funding in the long run as Cuba becomes like a more and more country and that's more equal, and these influences and colonial influences wane. The difference on our side of the house is the moment in which you appeal to the people of Afro descent and people who believe in Sanitarianism. In the long run, which we never contested, these people who join your church, attend your masses, are going to become more and more Catholic and more traditionally Catholic for the reasons that we gave you. This matters more to you because as those followers become far more like religious, far more fervent, you no longer need the white people in the long run because now the vast majority of people in society will support you to a greater extent. But also importantly, political power also shifts over time, right? Where like presumably these white people won't be in power over time. Presumably at some point Cuba is going to democratize or something along those lines, right? We can assume that in the long run, what matters more is you appeal to the majority of the population, and this ensures that you have far more control in Cuba compared to the people on their side of the house, which constantly has to deal with this dividing.
This might be a little semantic. I think the idea that there might be political sways at some point in Cuba and the Afro-Cubans will take power, I think that one's got to be new.
I think this is just the extension of the long run argument, but up to you
The
guys.
extension of what argument?
Like the argument that in the long run you'll get more followers.
I agree. I think that was new.
Fine.
You extended the new argument with more new.
Fine. The part that I think is definitely in my speech originally is that we want to care about the long run, and the long run these people will sell it. And two, the majority of Cuba is currently like Afro descent rather than like the white people are in the minority. I
think it is very distinct. It's very distinct to go from there are lots of people in Cuba and you might get lots of people to become Catholic. That's very distinct from saying Cuba's going to democratize. These are very different. So I'm going to say
even if Cuba doesn't democratize, right, it's still important to have the majority of people in the long run because we think that like in the long run things might change and you can wait on that regard. Right? I don't even know how it's going to change, but it is lower than likely not to change in the advantage of the majority of the people inside of Cuba, and you also get more zealous followers that has a greater quantity than a smaller percentage of followers that might not listen to you anyways. Lastly then, we also think that what you need to prevent is also the threat of schism, right? That these people actively go against you and you lose influence inside of Cuba, insofar as the Catholic Church no longer has the same authority as they previously have. For these reasons, proposed.